My name is Josh Heikkila. I used to be here in the Twin Cities. I'm still part of the Presbytery. I'm a pastor. But since 2009, I've been working in West Africa, a mission co-worker of the Presbyterian Church. So I'm based in Ghana, the country of Ghana in West Africa. And I always say, it's that part of Africa, the West Coast that comes out. And I work with the partnerships that we have in West Africa with Ghana, Togo, Nigeria, Niger, and Liberia. They're all in that western part. Some of them were former French colonies, former British. Liberia wasn't necessarily a colony of the United States, but it was settled by freed slaves that returned. So it's interesting. They all have their different histories, their different cultures, but there's a lot of similarities that bring them together. And I work to help the partnerships, the relationships between our church, the Presbyterian Church U.S.A, and the Presbyterian churches there. So we do lots of things together. It can be visits. People go back and forth. We work on projects together. I help sometimes with the disaster assistance and the hunger programs if they get involved with the region. We don't really have a good way to describe it, but I sometimes say I'm a Presbyterian ambassador to West Africa. I think that's a good way to describe it. An ambassadorial role in some ways is accurate. A few years ago, I visited you in Hudson, and you cleared out some of your church closets with old banners that I took back. So there are different congregations around West Africa that have some of your old banners hanging on their walls, and they're definitely grateful for those gifts. They're a reminder of the ways we're in partnership with one another. One of the real challenges of living in West Africa is that I don't know if this is the way to put it, but death is so much more common. I think because there's not that strong a health system and there's not always access that people have. And I don't know if in the tropical climates, sickness is more common. Certain tropical diseases like malaria are more common. The roads aren't always in good condition and the cars are old. Seems that it's very common. There's always someone, you hear of dying from malaria, or they had high blood pressure and had never gone to the doctor, or the doctor had never checked about that, or they were in an old car, they got in an accident and they died. I mean, it's really difficult in some ways that it's so common, and it's a lot of times young people too. Malaria really hits children very hard, so those under 5. But other sicknesses, I had a friend just died a couple weeks ago, and I think he was 42. And we, in the U.S., we hear people in their 30s and 40s die a little bit, but it's not so common. It's a tough balance of grief, but there's also a joy in it, which is really surprising me over the years. And I was thinking of how to describe it, and I'm not really sure, but there's such a celebration of life. When people die young, there's like anywhere, there's grief, there's sadness, there's loss, there's questions why. But there's such also a gratefulness for people's lives. There's almost like a tenderness, like people will be very honest about what someone meant to them and how they touched their lives and how they will miss them. One of the things that I really like also in Ghana in particular, they celebrate anniversaries of deaths. So the 1st year, the 5th year, the 10th year. So there's also quite a strong remembrance of people. I don't think we do that. I mean, I think in our minds we do it. You remember someone, it's 10 years since someone died, but we don't do public gatherings or public remembrances. And they do that, and it's nice. With this mixture of grief and joy, sometimes I feel like because life there is much more tenuous, you don't know when you're going to get sick, and if you do get sick, you don't always have access to hospitals. I think when we wake up sick, our first thought is like, let me get some medicine or let me go to the doctor. Sometimes their first thought is let me pray. Maybe it's because for some people it's the only thing they have, so they turn to prayer. But I think at the same time, I don't know, sometimes I think as Americans because we have a lot of resources, when we wake up in the morning, our first thought is like, oh, what's going to go wrong today? Or, we almost look at the world like it's supposed to be good. So then we point out what's gone wrong. where when you don't know what life is going to bring you, you wake up much more looking at what are the wonderful things that are going to happen today? What is the joy? What is the beauty? It's at times a much greater optimism in the midst of the difficulties, where I think sometimes we have so much, but we're still pessimistic.
It sounds like through perhaps the mysteries of God, it just cultivates a greater attention to the goodness and the joy in the midst of it all that's kind of ever present.
I'm always amazed when you see a beautiful scene, maybe in mountains or beach. People in West Africa will often say, when they look at something beautiful like that, they'll say, "Isn't God great?" They just express it in terms of God. And I don't think we use that language. I don't know. We say it's beautiful, or look at this beautiful view. But for them, it's always, isn't God great? Isn't God wonderful? Look at the beauty of God's creation. I think they're a much more communal society, that people spend much more time together. I've been amazed since I'm back here in the Twin Cities. I mean, of course, it's COVID and so much is shut down and churches are shut. Just how few people I see sometimes I want to go to the local store to buy something just to see people. and there it's the other way around. I can walk down the street just to go to the local store, and I might probably pass 100 people. And in church, it's the same way. The average person probably comes to church 3 or 4 times a week. They come on Sundays, they come for Bible studies, they come for choir practice, they come for a meeting. There's just a much greater sense of community in their lives. And I think it's partly the way they live. Most people live within walking distance of the church where they are. So you just get up and walk. We are in our cars, we're isolated, that sort of thing. There's such social people. And I think it's because they grow up living in communities close to one another. They're larger families. They want the people around. There's this happiness scale. It's in the news from time to time. They talk of happy countries. And when you look at the way they rank it, it's education, it's health, quality of life things. But one of the questions that the happiness scales never actually ask is, are you happy? They say all these things will be indicators of happiness. But ultimately, asking someone, are you happy or not? It's a fascinating question, because according to those scales, it's the Europeans, Americans who should be the happiest, and we rank highest on the scales. But when you actually ask someone to their face, are you happy? People sometimes who have so much have a difficult time answering that question. But in a country like Ghana, if you ask people they're happy, yes, and you see it on their face, and in church you see it in the music and in the dancing and in the joy. There's a quality of that I think we could learn from.
Thank you for sharing these wonderful reflections to keep us connected to your faithful work and our siblings in Christ in West Africa. What are other invitations you might have for us about how we could pray for our siblings and for your work, or other ways to be supportive?
And we're grateful for the support, the prayers, everything. I would say that we also, and our partners, have a lot also to give to the U.S. church. In the U.S. right now, I think a lot of our churches are struggling, and we're looking for ways to bring vitality and life. And sometimes interacting with people in other countries, Presbyterians in other countries, seeing the way they live, they worship, can do some of that. And I think there's so much that we also receive by getting involved. So if you can find ways to hear more of the stories and interact more with partners overseas, I can assure you that it will contribute something also to what's going on in your church.